Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Watson Michael from Ceylon Institute of English and Leadership. And once again, we are glad to have Dr. Ravi Fernando back with us. So for those who don't know, Dr. Ravi Fernando, he's a board director at Dilmah Tea, a board director at LOLC Holdings PLC, and he's a board director of a few other companies. Those are multinationals and local companies. Also, he's an alumnus of the University of Cambridge and INSEAD Business School. And he's an executive in residence at INSEAD Business School. Also, he created the 21st century board leadership model where a US copyright was obtained. So, Dr. Fernando, how are you doing today?
Hi, Michael. Very good to see you after some time. I think I'm doing really well and very excited about the launch of our second book, and looking forward to making this book a globally game-changing book for everyone in the world.
Absolutely. So for those who don't know, here is the book cover page, which you all can see, right? So it's called 21st Century Leadership to Fight the Red Code for Business. All right. So now most of, and you can see it's recommended by many people, right? All who are at an international level, right? So it's going to be a great book. Okay. So this is the second book of Dr. Fernando's. So his first book was about sustainability, 7 imperatives for sustainable business, which is available on Amazon Kindle. So if you all are not bought that book, just go ahead and you can buy it on Amazon Kindle. It's less than a cup of cappuccino, even in Sri Lankan money or even in European euros. All right. So Dr. Fernando, our first question for today is, most people don't know what is called this 21st century leadership. They only know what is democratic, bureaucratic, autocratic leadership. So could you enlighten us?
Excellent. I think that's a very good place to start our discussion today, Michael. So I must give a little background to this.
Sure.
Why I thought it was important for us to have a category called 21st century leadership. So as I look at world leaders, business leaders, national leaders, leaders of different organizations, one common fact that came to me as I studied how they approach things is that a majority of them seem to be yet thinking of 19th century leadership strategies and ignoring the reality of the 21st century. And one of the things that is very common that I found in especially global leaders who are running nations and businesses is they are somehow or another ignoring a very important characteristic, and that is the fact of science.
Yeah.
Because lots of people tend to ignore science and think that science is for the scientists, as opposed to accepting the fact that science impacts our everyday life in a way that it is, you can't describe it. If we ignore science, then what we are really saying is we are ignoring the reality of the world. So the first characteristic of a 21st century leader is a leader who respects and appreciates science and makes sure that they mobilize science in every corporate strategy, national strategy that they develop. Because if you ignore science,
yes,
then you are missing out the reality of the world today.
Absolutely.
So the first characteristic of a 21st century leader is someone who appreciates and mobilizes science in strategy. I will now tell you why I have made it the first of 4 key characteristics of a 21st century leader.
Sure.
The reason that I have put this as the number 1 characteristic of a 21st century leader is because when I look at the last 35 years since what we call the United Nations Brundtland Report, and this was, they called it our common future. In that report, they made it very clear to every single human being, to the leaders of the world, that we are now compromising science and we are compromising the planet by continuing to burn fossil fuels. So
Yes.
fossil fuels are coal, petroleum, gas, and diesel, and all those petroleum derivatives. And 35 years ago, it was very clear there was enough scientific evidence that if we keep burning more and more fossil fuels, that they will release into the atmosphere greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide and all these gases, which will continue to heat the planet. And that we will begin to cross various boundaries like plus 1.5 degrees centigrade from our 1880 year when the industrial revolution started, and people started burning coal at that time.
Yes.
However, in the last 35 years since this report was published, what I have found is world leaders and business leaders have basically ignored the science. Basically, they have almost told the rest of the world, we are going to ignore all this science and we are going to continue with business as usual. And this ignoring of science is why we are now facing what the UN Secretary General has called the code red for humanity and the code red for business.
Yeah.
So ignoring science doesn't take away the problems that science, if you ignore science, the problems that'll deal us. And all you have to do nowadays is to put your TV set on and watch any news bulletin, whether it's BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, China TV, CGTN, Euro TV. The news is full of what kind of climate emergencies are occurring all over the world.
Yeah.
And the thing is that today, when you look at the news, you see 1/3 of Pakistan is destroyed and is underwater. And we are talking of a $20 to $30 billion of their GDP wiped out.
Yeah.
You see in USA, in Kentucky, in Texas, unprecedented flooding. You see Shanghai in China, unprecedented flooding. Mumbai. So when it comes to the climate emergency, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're in a developed nation or developing nation or underdeveloped nation, the climate emergency is going to destroy a good percentage of the GDP that you have created. Wow. And basically going to flood you out. And the BBC made a news bulletin about 2 days ago, and they said that the melting of the polar caps in the Arctic have increased 30-40% more than scientists even expected. And they expect to see a 26 centimeter rise in sea levels this year. And this, we are talking of a massive increase of nearly 20 feet in the next 2 to 3 years. So all these leaders, catastrophic, and they have all ignored the science. So the first reason I created this 21st century leadership model is for people to understand that you cannot ignore science and you cannot ignore the scientific evidence that burning fossil fuels creates in the world. And this code red is something we are all facing today. So the second characteristic of a 21st century leader is someone, because they understand the science, because they know what devastation science will deliver to the world, they have an urgency to impact the code red for business and the code red for humanity. You know, if you don't know science and if you ignore science, then if someone tells you your house is on fire,
Yeah.
or your house is going to catch fire,
Yeah.
you might say, when the fire comes, I will deal with it.
Mm.
That is what majority of the world leaders have done. Now
Mm.
the house is on fire, the planet is on fire.
Yeah.
Now they are basically yet debating whether to end using fossil fuels or not. And this
Correct.
is an absolute catastrophic leadership failure,
Mm-hmm.
because as opposed to stopping the use of fossil fuels,
Yeah.
what the world is doing is subsidizing the use of fossil fuels to the
Mm-hmm.
tune of 5.9 trillion US dollars per annum, so that
Wow.
people can buy fossil fuels cheaper. Just
Mm.
imagine if the people are, this is why I'm saying people are ignoring science and people are ignoring the reality of science. And we are now all facing the climate emergency and the code red for humanity.
Yes.
So the second characteristic is they will demonstrate an urgency to impact the climate emergency and exit fossil fuels.
Mm.
The third characteristic of a 21st century leader is that they will, in every decision they make, ensure they put planet or the environment and people before they have profit. They will ensure every decision is planet and people before profit. That is the third characteristic of a 21st century leader. And the last characteristic, the fourth characteristic that I capture in this book, is that a 21st century leader will look at the 21st century board leadership model and make sure that those items in the model, there are 6 items in the model, will be in their board agenda, and will discuss those items at every board meeting, or discuss the ones which are very definitely going to be relevant to that business. So the new board agenda, if it is led by 21st century leaders, will have the 21st century model as the agenda items.
Mm.
And I can tell you, Michael, I
Yes.
sit on about 8 or 9 boards, which are both local and
Yes.
multinational and international.
Yeah.
90% of the boards in the world spend over 90% of their time looking at the last month's results and the
Okay.
last quarter's results. They spend less than 10% of their time looking at the future, looking at strategies for the future, looking at the realities that are going to impact the future, like the climate emergency. So,
Mm.
as a result, when these climate emergencies happen, they are totally unprepared. And as a result of that, I say that the world is today led by 19th century leaders, but operating in the 21st century.
Mm.
So, this book is an attempt for all these 19th century leaders to wake up to the reality of science, to wake up to the reality of the climate emergency, and now, as 21st century leaders, take action today and now, and not ignore it like they have done for 35 years, despite all the scientific evidence that has shown them that we are going to have these climate emergencies hitting us. So that is just to tell you, a 21st century leader has these 4 characteristics. And this book is attempting to wake up all 19th century leaders who are running businesses and nations to the reality that they have to wake up to the reality of the 21st century.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, how will this book help the future leaders?
Excellent. I think that's a very good question. So, to explain how this book will help future leaders, Michael,
Mm-hmm.
I will just go through the key chapters in this book.
Sure.
As the moment you know the key chapters in this book, you will then immediately know what this book is trying to attempt to teach. So the first couple of chapters in this book is basically talking about the climate emergency and the code red for humanity. And actually the first chapter is titled, Is There a Code Red for Humanity and Business? Is there
a red code for humanity and business?
Is there a code red for humanity and business? So, and in that chapter, we try to explain to everyone the scientific evidence that has been there for 35 years that there is a code red for humanity. Okay? So that is the first question. In the first chapter, is there a code red for humanity and business? And the reason I'm asking the question in the first chapter is because if you're not convinced that there is a code red for humanity and business, then you're not going to do anything about it. You will continue with business as usual. You will continue to lead countries as usual. So the first two chapters are focused on educating everyone who reads this book about the scientific evidence that there is a code red for humanity, and that the World Economic Forum have identified the climate emergency and climate action failure as the two number one and number two global risks in the year 2020, 2021, and 2022. All 3 years, same two risks are the two global risks. Now, the World Economic Forum is full of all the world's leaders. So, if all the world's leaders of business and nations, including G7, G20, top Fortune 500 companies, if all of them say the climate emergency and climate action failure are the two biggest risks on in the planet today that will affect nations, that will affect business, then there is enough evidence with the science to say we are in a code red situation. So the first two chapters simply look at that. And the third chapter, Michael, we go into explaining what is 21st century leadership. What are the characteristics of 21st century leadership? And in the third chapter, what I try to do is to explain these four characteristics that I mentioned to you, so that everyone understands they can do a self-analysis and a self-evaluation at this point in the book and find out whether they are 21st century leaders or whether they are currently thinking like 19th century leaders operating in the 21st century. Now, I must confess to you that this book is not about trying to make people feel that they are not ready for the 21st century. This book is to actually show them they need to urgently get ready for the 21st century and helping them move from 19th century thinking to 21st century thinking. So we first talk about the four characteristics that I mentioned earlier, and then we go into the fourth chapter, which is a very important chapter in this book, where I have talked about the 6 elements of the model. So we talk about, I think if you remember, I think I shared the model with you some time back. So the model has the 3 emergencies on the top of the model: climate emergency, health and social emergency, and economic emergency. You remember we did a whole series of lectures.
Absolutely.
And I think
21st Century Leadership Challenges series.
Exactly. 21st Century Leadership Challenges series. And I want to tell everyone watching this program, if you want to understand what is the 21st century leadership, board leadership model, go to Mr. Watson's website on YouTube, and there are 6 lectures on the 6 elements of the model, which we discussed last year or a year back.
Last year.
So last year. So we have these three emergencies. Now, why have I called these emergencies? The reason I have called the climate emergency, health and social emergency, and economic emergency as emergencies is because you need urgent action.
Mm.
You know, Michael,
Yes.
when you can't move someone to the ICU or the ECU in a hospital and then say we'll come next month to treat this patient, right?
Correct.
The word emergency in simple English, I think, has been lost in transit.
Yeah.
Because people don't seem to understand the word acting with urgency to fight the emergency. So we have 3 modules on the 3 emergencies, and then we go to 3 more modules on the 3 disruptors. So what are the disruptors? Technology disruption, we move to geopolitical disruption, and we move into governance disruption. So the 4th chapter has a chapter for each of these 6 elements. And I must give you some really good news. For every chapter in the 6 modules that we talk about in these, so I call it chapter 4.1, 4.2, 4.3 to 4.6. For every module, I have a case study of a 21st century leader's exemplary action.
Wow. A case
for
study.
That module, right?
Every chapter, a case
For
study.
every chapter,
wow.
Right? And to me, that is the uniqueness of this book. So I'm not just preaching the 21st century board leadership model, I'm giving real life examples. Actually, there are 12 case studies, 2 case studies in every module of leaders who, in the 21st century, in the last 2 to 3 years, have taken these 4 steps that I talked about and have done amazing things in their companies. So some of the people, I'm just going to mention some of the names that are featured in this book as case studies, as mini case studies using public information. So we didn't have to do too much research because their information is already in the public domain. Yeah. So under climate emergency, there are 2 amazing leaders I feature in mini case studies. One is a leader called Henrik Paulsen of Denmark. He was the CEO of a company called Ørsted. And Ørsted, before it was named Ørsted, was the Danish oil and gas company.
Yeah.
What Paulsen did was he converted the Danish oil and gas company from 100% oil and gas business to 100% wind power business. Today, the company Ørsted is among the top 2 or 3 companies in wind power in the world. Just imagine, leadership. That is 21st century leadership, where he realized he respected the science and converted the country. And today, Denmark, if you watch the news recently, about 2-3 days ago, just recently, 2 days ago, signed a contract with the German government, and Germany and Denmark are now going to expand wind power to the whole of Europe to fight the gap that is now there, because Russian oil and gas will no longer be sent. They are blocking that after the Ukraine war. Yeah. Germany and Denmark are going to be championing the expansion of wind power in the whole of Europe using their knowledge and technology. And the company championing all of this is Ørsted. So this is from yesterday's news. I'm sharing this item with you. So that is the good news about my 12 case studies are they are of today's leaders, not yesterday's leaders. They are of leaders leading the change for the 21st century today. The second case study I have featured under climate emergency, Michael, is a case study of a South Australia.
Okay.
Now, What is interesting about South Australia is, if you remember,
Yes.
until recently, Australia was led by a 19th century leader, right?
Okay.
I won't mention his name, but the last election, he was basically removed because this leader wanted to continue using coal power as the main energy source for Australia. But in South Australia, there was a leader called J. Wetherill, who was the governor of South Australia. He said, we are not going to go to coal power. We are going to 100% renewable energy, despite the leader of the country saying, we are going in this direction. So fast forward to 2022, South Australia is 100% driven by renewable energy.
Wow.
In 2016, they went into 100% renewable energy. And now the last 6 years, they have been in 100% renewable energy. And now they are moving towards 100% electrified transportation and cars. Just like I think you mentioned that California is going into electric cars. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some temporary ban on gas vehicles.
So the beauty about California is they have seen the future, and they are going into electric cars 100%. And actually what they have said is they're giving time till 2030. Now just imagine, Jay Wetherill in South Australia gave them time till 2025 only to go to 100% electric vehicles. So these are the two cases we feature in the climate emergency. And then we move into the health and social emergency, and there we feature two amazing case studies. One, a case study about Singapore.
Okay.
Singapore is a country which has developed its country with about 5 to 6 million people, but continues to commit itself to sustainable development and not simply development. And the second case we also look at is Dilmah as a company, how they have ensured. They have the first company I have come across that commits 15% of its profits to impact society and humanity. 15% of profits. Now, I can tell you, there are hardly any companies giving more than 2 to 3%. So committing 15% is a big ask. And they have a foundation called the Ravi Fernando Foundation, and they are impacting the poorest people in society. They have a special center in Moratuwa and a second center in Batiklo. And in Batiklo, they have created thousands of cashew nut farmers by giving them all the support to achieve that. Wow. And they are helping all these farmers go for solar power in their factory, in their homes and everything. So this is a great story that we can learn from.
Absolutely.
The third case study is the third area is on economic emergency, and we feature 3 excellent case studies. The first case study is a company called Patagonia. So Patagonia is the world leader in outdoor clothing and in outdoor adventure equipment. Patagonia has a simple policy. The policy is, we will repair everything that we sell. So you don't have to buy new things. Repair. They have 40,000 repair stations all over the world. Their entire business strategy is about repair and reuse. Repair and reuse. In fact, in their advertisements, they say, don't buy this new jacket if you already have one. So they're actually telling people, don't buy something new.
Yeah.
If you have something you have bought from Patagonia, give it to us. And the case study is about a leader called Yvon Chouinard, who is the man who founded Patagonia 30 odd years ago. And this is a truly 21st century leader. He was thinking 21st century ideas 30 years ago, right? So we feature Yvonne Shana's case. The second case we feature is Google of Sundar Pichai, how he has transformed Google to become a sustainable company who is committed to ensuring Google is not part of the problem of the climate emergency. Do you know that Google has made a commitment? They are already 100% renewable energy driven, by the way, right?
Yes.
Google, amongst the world's biggest companies, is 100% renewable energy driven already. They have made a commitment that they are going to be 24/7, 100% renewable energy driven by 2030, and they will offset from the day Google started all their carbon emissions with this 24/7 strategy.
Wow.
Just imagine. So when business leaders tell me they can't move to renewable energy, it is a joke.
Yeah.
It is basically saying they don't understand the urgency and they don't understand the need for doing it. If Google can do it, anybody in the world can do it. And you know, Google is an IT company using the massive amount of data centers, massive amount of energy is being created, is used up in Google's data centers, but they are already moving to 100% renewable energy and 24/7 renewable energy. So that's the second case we feature. And the third case in economic emergency that I feature is Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And his amazing commitment to replacing all fossil fuel vehicles in the world with electric vehicles, and the Tesla story, and his gigafactories. He has now 5 gigafactories, 2 in the US, in Nevada and in Austin, Texas. He has 1 in Germany, in Berlin, 1 in Shanghai, and he's about to open the 1 in Berlin very soon, and he's looking at 1 in India.
Wow.
And that is going to be a game changer. And I must mention that Elon Musk thinks 21st century. He's a science graduate. He is a physics graduate. So for him to become science-led was no big deal, right? So these are the 6 cases that we feature in the emergencies. And then in terms of the disruptors, we also look at some case studies. And in terms of technology disruption, we once again feature Google, because you cannot escape the fact that Google is not only a 21st century leader in energy, but it is a 21st century leader in innovation, with using AI in a way that is unprecedented. Then we look at the case study in the area of geopolitics. We look at the China One Belt, One Road strategy. We look at the European Green Deal and the European Gateway strategy.
Okay.
And also talk in this book about the new emerging geopolitical order, where Russia and China are working together very closely.
Okay.
And the European Union and USA and other countries are working together. So there is now a tension between this Russia-China combination and the rest of the world.
Okay.
And I think this is something that's happening now. And that is why I'm happy that this book is very current when we feature cases like that. And so far, all the cases I have given you are tomorrow's cases of tomorrow's leaders. I have not mentioned one name of some leader that was known 50 years ago. All the leaders I'm talking about are today's leaders. The last module is governance. And in the governance module, I feature a case study on a report called Banking on Chaos 2022-2021 report, where they're showing how the banking industry in the world is compromising the world by investing yet in fossil fuels to the tune of $3 to $4 trillion, even though in the Paris Agreement they committed to stop using fossil fuels. Now they have compromised the world unbelievably. And some of the big banks in the world are all compromising the world including Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, Citibank, HSBC, Barclays. These banks are funding fossil fuel projects. Now, I already started by saying the third characteristic of a 21st century leader is you put planet and people before profit. Now, here's an example of putting profit before planet, profit before people. So we do the case study. The case study we feature in governance section is a case study of the European Investment Bank led by Werner Hoyer. And I'm proud to say I did the case study myself for INSEAD. I wrote that case study. And one of the amazing decisions that they took, which I think we have played a small part in influencing, is they made a commitment that from 2021, last year, they will not invest €1 on any fossil fuel project in the world. Now, if the European Investment Bank, which is the world's biggest money lending institution with a disbursement of 80 billion euros a year, if they are bigger than World Bank and IMF combined, if they can take a decision to stop funding fossil fuels, then why can't all the banks in the world stop funding fossil fuels? Because EIB is a beautiful case study, and this is featured in our book. And the last case study there is Santander Bank in Europe, which has also taken the same decision. So I have given you the contents of the book. In chapter 4, we go into a deep dive of the 6 modules featuring 21st century leaders who are doing and walking the talk under each module. And then we go into chapter 5, which is a strategy framework. Now, what is interesting about the strategy framework, Michael, is anyone reading the book, I have done the strategy framework in such an easy way, they can create a 21st century strategy, just filling in every section in the strategy framework.
Wow.
So chapter 5 is walking the talk for your company, even for your institute. You can create a 21st century leadership, board leadership model strategy framework. If the only chapter you had was chapter 5, that's all you need to create your 21st century leadership strategy. And we guide you through all the 6 modules in that chapter 5. And my last chapter in the book is chapter 6, which says, are you ready to be a 21st century leader? That's the last chapter in the book. And in that chapter, we challenge the people to say, if you are ready, I have created a section in the book where you can write your name and say, I, Watson Michael, am ready to be a 21st century leader and to mobilize the 21st century board leadership model, and sign it and put your date. In the book itself, I have created that space so that everyone leading the book can make a commitment at the end. So that is a big overview of the book, Watson.
Super. Excellent insights as well, right? So the funniest part is like a 19th century leader working in the 21st century, right?
And do you agree with that? Because, if you think about it, why would people who knew 35 years ago you should avoid using fossil fuels, yet 70% of the time use fossil fuels? Look at our country. Our country is blessed with sunlight for 365 days of the year. But our energy is almost 100% met with fossil fuels. 70-20% fossil fuels. And now we have unbelievable queues waiting for the fossil fuel ships to come to this country. We should have been in electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles, and we should have been a country where we don't need power cuts because we have sunlight stored with batteries, and with floating solar. This country should have been a renewable energy paradise, because we have the blessing of sunlight 365 days of the year. Why are we importing fossil fuels from different countries, paying crazy amounts of money? You can see how we are now struggling to find the money to pay for the next fossil fuel shipment. Imagine if this country was renewable energy driven. We can use all that money for development. We can use all that money to do other things which are needed today, like food, like infrastructure, and we would have been saving this. So the 21st century model is basically highlighting the fact that we have many 19th century leaders. What is your view, Michael, about
Yeah, I
my
mean, yeah,
summary?
it makes sense because like when the planet is burning, we need to find solutions, right? And when you say about 19th century leaders living in the 21st century, I mean, I'm not going to mention some people's name, but when it comes to the stakeholders of my institute as well, I get people who come in for a certain thing or for a certain role or for some other, for whatever they come, but I know they're not capable enough. And
Exactly.
they just show a fake image. They say they can commit, they talk so much, but when it comes to the results and performance, it's pathetic.
Absolutely. I
Pathetic.
mean, what is quite stunning for me, and this is something that explains that there are 19th century leaders running 21st century countries and businesses. So there is a report called the Earth Overshoot Day report, and what it does is it looks at every country in the world, every country, and it says if people use fossil fuels and release carbon emissions like the population of that country, and if the whole world's 8 billion people use fossil fuels in the per capita consumption of that country, how quickly we will finish the carbon budget for the year, right? And believe it or not, a majority of the countries are finishing their carbon budget by July of the year, which means 5 months of the year there is no budget. And there are some countries, and I'm going to name them, countries like Luxembourg, countries like the Qatar, countries like USA, Canada, and even United Arab Emirates. They are finishing their carbon budgets for the year by March 2022. That means 9 months of the year, they are already moving into using the next year's budget. So this to me confirms, so many leaders in the world, and even in terms of European countries, if people in the world behaved and consumed carbon emissions and had a lifestyle like majority of the European country people, most of our carbon budgets will finish by April, May of the year. So sometimes I ask the question, when these European leaders are talking so committed, and some of these leaders in businesses are talking about saving the planet and wanting to do things, then when you look at their carbon emissions, you can see they are talking one thing, they are walking another thing. And to me, the difference between talk and walk is basically the difference between a 21st century leader and a 19th century leader. Because if I am committed to fighting the code red for humanity, then in my personal life, I must do everything to reduce my personal carbon emissions. Do you agree?
Yes.
If I'm not doing that, how can I be called a 21st century leader? So I can tell you the house I live in is 100% renewable energy driven.
Wow.
I have not had a electricity bill worth talking about from 2017. Number two, I have installed batteries in the house so that in the event of a power cut, I will have battery storage to store my solar power. I drive a hybrid car and I'm looking at going for electrics. I can tell you, if you come to my home, and I hope I invite you soon, most of my, all surrounding my house is stuff with trees. I have about 120 trees around the house. Right.
Wow.
So,
120 trees.
yeah.
Wow.
Now, the point I'm trying to make is, if I am a 21st century leader, in my personal life, I must act like I'm fighting the code red for humanity and business. And I must become part of the solution to the 21st century challenges, not be part of the pollution or be part of the problem. Now, if every leader in the world running a country or a business first did the right thing personally in their own homes, then it will be very easy for them to do things for their constituents, for their people, for their company. If they are doing the wrong thing for themselves, then they can't go and tell people, you have to do the right thing for the planet. So that to me is what I call a big gap between 21st century leadership and 19th century leadership. 19th century leadership is where you put profit before people, profit before planet in all your national decisions and in all your business decisions. What you're really saying is, I am not taking this climate emergency seriously. I don't think this code red for humanity or code red for business is going to happen in the short term. So I will make the maximum amount of profit in the short term so that I can live a very comfortable, happy life. Now, what are these leaders doing in reality? Michael, what they're doing is they are compromising the future generations and every bit of life that the future generations have. They are basically saying, we will use all the resources and leave nothing for the future generations. Do you know, in 1987, they defined sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations.
United Nations Brundtland.
That's right. The United Nations Brundtland 1987 definition. Now I can tell you, 19th century leaders who have run the countries, run the businesses for the last 35 years have absolutely compromised all the future generations of this world by simply using up resources much more than they should have and continuing to burn fossil fuels. So now I think, proven my case that 19th century leaders are leading all the countries and businesses by showing you the Earth Overshoot Day that almost 80-90% of the world's countries are basically, if the world's population lived like those countries, will finish the carbon budget for the year by July of 2022. That means all those countries need 21st century leaders, not 19th century leaders. If you look at the businesses, you know, I have featured 12 amazing business leaders and businesses. But sadly, Michael, this is not the rule. This is the exception to the rule. Majority of businesses are putting profit before planet, profit before people. And most businesses are, especially if you look at the fossil fuel industry. Now, I told you about a fossil fuel company who became a renewable energy company.
Yeah, Denmark, Henrik Olsen.
Denmark's Ørsted. Okay. Now, why can't all these fossil fuel companies continue to be energy companies but become renewable energy companies. Why haven't they done that? Because they are putting profit before planet. They are putting profit before people. Otherwise, Saudi Aramco, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Total, and all these big oil companies should today be transforming themselves to become the world's renewable energy companies. No, they are not transforming to do that. They are persisting with fossil fuels. They are blocking every possible way to stop fossil fuels. So to me, these companies are all led by 19th century leaders. Banks, how is it that they are putting profit before planet? By simply funding more fossil fuel projects, investing 3 trillion US dollars to fund more fossil fuel projects. They should be funding renewable energy projects. So there again, I have to admit that these companies are probably led by 19th century leaders. Otherwise, how can you ever justify investing in fossil fuels, which are the cause of the climate emergency? How can you subsidize the cause of the emergency? So I think I have given a very powerful case
Absolutely.
with facts and data that 19th century leaders are running 21st century businesses and nations, and they have to all change.
Absolutely. So you have explained very clearly about this book, and of course, this is just a brief of the book which Dr. Fernando spoke. So the book will be out by November. So you all can get the hard copy, or you all can get the
e-copy.
Soft copy, yeah, which is available on Kindle. So let's say you don't like using a hardcover, you always want to have it with you. You can, like in this phone, you can have the Kindle app, and that's what I do. I get all my books on Kindle these days.
I love that.
Yeah, so you can get it on Kindle. So it'll be a very interesting book for all those who want to read, right? So irrespective of the title you hold, there is no title in leadership most of the time. So if you want to become a 21st century leader, just go ahead and read this book, right? It's all about leadership.
Absolutely. It's about leadership that is science-led, number one, that is sustainability mindset, triple bottom line mindset. So leaders who are science-led, sustainability mindset, and the book is helping you to become a leader who is science-led and sustainability mindset, and even giving you a framework to do that. And that is why I think this book is going to be an essential read for most business leaders in the world. And I just want to mention something you just talked about, which is Kindle. Now, you know, one of the things I have decided with the launch of this book is I would like 60-70% of the people who buy this book to buy it in terms of Kindle or ebooks, and reduce the number of printed books, because every time we print a book, we are also then cutting down another forest to make the wood pulp. So I have made sure that the amount of hardcover copies, it will be only available in hardcover for about 30%, and 70% will be the Kindle version. So please look at buying a Kindle version, which is like Watson Michael said, costing you almost nothing, but it has featured 12 21st century leaders and given you a simple framework where you can virtually fill in the blanks and build your own company's or nation strategy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And those who want to get an idea about sustainability, please check again. The author's name goes as R.A. Fernando on Kindle. So if you can't find sustainability, just search for R.A. Fernando. Then you can find Dr. Fernando's book on that. And any final words, Dr. Fernando, you want to say? So,
yes. I honestly think that too many people people who are entrusted and given the mantle of leadership in the world today. Too many people who have been given this amazing responsibility, don't seem to realize that they are responsible not just for making profits and money for themselves or their company or their country, that they are responsible for the people of the planet and they are responsible for the environment of the planet. A good leader is one who sees that they have been given I call it a God-given opportunity to be placed in a leadership position, and you have a responsibility to the planet, to the people of the planet, and to make sure that you have a good economic model. Unfortunately, most leaders in the world today, Michael, are thinking short term. How can I make a profit in the short term? How can I make my company succeed in the short term? You're not there as the short-term leader of your company. You're not there as the short-term leader of your nation. You are there as the leader of the nation and the leader of the company. And we have to all grow up and accept the fact that we are failing people and we are failing the planet because of our short-term thinking. So my final message to everyone, as you start the journey to become a 21st century leader, remember, you have a stewardship. You have a responsibility to the people who are in your nation. You have a responsibility to the people in your company. You have a responsibility to your own family to do the right thing for the planet and to do the right thing for people, because unfortunately everyone has lost track that they have been given this great honor of leadership and they are using the leadership for personal gain. And what they don't realize is, even if they make amazing wealth for the company, even if they make amazing wealth for the country in terms of GDP growth, in one flood, in one climate emergency, all of those profits will be wiped away right in front of your eyes. And all the money that is in the bank will be of no use, because the climate emergency is where once we hit 2 degrees centigrade in terms of global temperature warming from 1880, they are talking of 20-foot sea level rise. When 20-foot sea level, according to the IPCC and also the World Meteorological Organization, and they are talking of this happening between now and 2025. Now, the world's GDP is $100 trillion today. And they are talking of a loss of between 54 to 67 trillion dollars from the global GDP as soon as we cross 2 degrees centigrade. So if you think you're making great profits and making great money for your country and growing your GDP and growing your bank balance personally and growing all this, in one flash, 67% of that will be wiped away in front of your eyes, like what happened to Pakistan this week, where 20% of their GDP is getting wiped out as we see it in front of our eyes. Why aren't we understanding that doing things for the short term will not benefit us? That we have to now do things, the right things for the planet, by exiting fossil fuels, moving to renewables, and developing sustainable lifestyles so that our future generations have a planet to live in. The last thing you should be in your legacy when someone talks about a 21st century leader, they should be able to say, here was a leader who did the right thing when he or she was in leadership positions. And as a result of him doing the right things or her doing the right things, we now enjoy a positive lifestyle, and we have been able to avoid the quadrant for humanity. Just imagine what a beautiful legacy of someone who has passed away, that they did the right thing when they were in leadership. And I challenge everyone listening to this podcast, do the right thing today for humanity, for the planet, for people, and you will leave a great legacy behind. Just like Yvonne Shuna, like uh, Elon Musk, like Sundar Pichai, like Paul Polman of Unilever, like the famous Warner Hoyer of EIB. These are leaders doing the right thing today, like Henrik Paulsen of Ørsted. They are doing the right thing today in the 21st century so that the future generations will have a planet to live in. And that is my last message to everyone. Do the right thing with your responsibility.
All right. So there you go, folks. You all heard about it. And please connect with us on LinkedIn. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. So you will get to know all the updates about the climate emergency, sustainability, about the book release, and many more interesting free information which you learn at other places by paying. You can learn a lot of free information by following Dr. Fernando's posts. And thank you, Dr. Fernando. Thank you for taking time and doing this podcast with us.
Thank you for having me. And I really appreciate the work that your institute is doing to educate people about what is happening in the world today. Congratulations and keep up your great work and keep inspiring all your followers to do the right thing.
Thank you very much.